Life, as it unfolds, brings with it many experiences, some uplifting, some challenging. Among these challenges, we encounter toxic people, those whose energy seems to drain us, whose words cut deeper than we care to admit. And yet, it is crucial to understand that these individuals are not an anomaly. They are a natural part of the human experience. They are not something to avoid, but rather something to learn from. For in every interaction, there lies an opportunity to transcend. The question is not how do we escape these people, but rather how do we deal with them wisely, with clarity and with grace? Toxic people are often seen as an unwanted disturbance in the flow of our lives. Their presence may feel like an interruption, a disruption to our sense of peace and balance. But if we take a step back and observe life with a broader perspective, we come to realize that such individuals are not some aberration or mistake of the universe. They are, in fact, a natural part of the human experience. It is easy to believe that our lives would be simpler and more harmonious if we could only rid ourselves of all negative and toxic influences. However, this view rests on the misconception that the absence of difficulty will lead to growth. In reality, it is often the challenges, the uncomfortable, the difficult, and yes, the toxic, that propel us forward on our spiritual and personal journeys. When we encounter toxicity in others, we are faced with a choice. We can allow it to consume us, or we can choose to approach it with a sense of understanding and acceptance. To accept the presence of toxic individuals in our lives is not to embrace their behavior or their harmful actions, but to acknowledge their existence without judgment. It is an act of seeing the world as it truly is, in its messy, unpredictable, and often contradictory nature. We do not live in a world where only positive and loving people exist. In fact, the more we expand our awareness, the more we realize that each person is a complex mix of light and shadow, virtue and flaw. This is the nature of humanity. But why must toxic people appear in our lives? It is as though life in its infinite wisdom has placed them there for a reason. They serve as mirrors, reflecting back to us parts of ourselves that we may have ignored or neglected. In many ways, toxic people act as a catalyst for our own personal growth. They present us with a challenge. How will we respond to their negativity? Will we react in kind, mirroring their toxic behavior? Or will we rise above, choosing to act with grace and understanding? In truth, the toxic individuals we encounter are not simply obstacles to be avoided. They are lessons in disguise. It is through them that we are invited to learn patience, compassion, and above all, resilience. When we choose to view these interactions as opportunities for growth, we shift the focus away from the other person's behavior and place it squarely on ourselves. How we respond is what truly matters. We are not powerless in the face of toxic people. We are simply unaware of the immense power we hold within us to choose our reactions. This choice, however, requires a certain level of maturity and self-awareness. It is easy to fall into the trap of reacting emotionally to the negative behavior of others. Anger, frustration, and defensiveness are natural responses when we are met with disrespect or hostility. But if we give in to these emotions, we allow the toxic person to control the course of our experience. Instead of reacting impulsively, we must take a step back and create space between stimulus and response. In this space lies our freedom. It is here that we can choose to not be swept away by the current of negativity, but rather to respond from a place of calm, rooted in the deep understanding that we are not defined by the actions of others. The moment we accept that toxic people are a natural part of life, we also begin to accept that we are not helpless in dealing with them. We have the power to shape our experience, regardless of the behavior of those around us. The key is not in avoiding toxic people, but in learning to engage with them in a way that protects our peace and preserves our energy. This is a lifelong practice, one that requires constant awareness and self-reflection. As we grow in our ability to accept the presence of toxic individuals without being consumed by them, we begin to see the world differently. We no longer see toxic people as enemies to be fought or avoided, but as fellow travelers on the same journey. They too are learning, struggling, and growing, albeit in ways that may seem destructive or hurtful. By recognizing their humanity and understanding that they are acting from their own pain, we free ourselves from the need to fight against them. In this way, acceptance becomes the gateway to true peace. It is not a passive resignation, but an active choice to maintain our inner balance, regardless of external circumstances. In essence, the smartest way to deal with toxic people is not to try to change them or remove them from our lives entirely, but to learn how to coexist with them in a way that honors our own well-being. By accepting their presence, we take away their power to disrupt our inner peace. We become the masters of our own experience, no longer subject to the whims of others. The key is not to focus on what we cannot control, another person's actions, but to focus on what we can control, our own response. In this way, we transcend the toxic energy around us and create a space of peace and strength that no one can take from us. So, when you encounter a toxic person in your life, take a moment to breathe deeply and remind yourself, this too is a part of life. It is not a mistake, nor is it something to fear. It is an opportunity for you to grow in wisdom and grace. By accepting their presence without judgment, and by choosing to respond from a place of awareness rather than reaction, you begin to reclaim your power. And in doing so, you transcend the toxicity, not by resisting it, but by embracing your own capacity to remain calm, centered, and whole, regardless of what the world may throw your way. The concept of non-reactivity and detachment is one of the most powerful tools we can cultivate in our journey to dealing with toxic people. It's not an easy thing to practice, especially in a world that often values immediate reactions, emotional expression, and confrontation. We are often taught to respond quickly, to defend ourselves when attacked, to protect our boundaries when violated, and yet in the presence of toxic people, this instinctual response can often exacerbate the problem rather than resolve it. When we allow ourselves to be dragged into emotional reactions by toxic individuals, we hand over our peace of mind and control to them. This is precisely what makes toxicity so insidious. It feeds off our emotional involvement. The more we react, the more we become entangled in their energy, and the more we allow their negativity to dictate the terms of our experience. But if we understand that our reactions are not fixed, but rather a conscious choice, we begin to see that we hold the power to disengage from the cycle of toxicity altogether. Non-reactivity doesn't mean passivity. It does not mean that we ignore our feelings, nor does it mean that we allow ourselves to be walked over. Instead, non-reactivity is the practice of observing our emotions and responses without immediately acting on them. It is the space between stimulus and response where we recognize that we don't have to be driven by our feelings or impulses. This space allows us to respond with awareness and intention, rather than reacting out of anger, fear, or frustration. To be reactive is to be at the mercy of external circumstances. When we react, we are driven by the conditions around us, by what others say, do, or think. In essence, we allow the outside world to shape our internal world. And when we encounter toxic people, their negative behavior can trigger strong emotions within us, such as anger, resentment, or hurt. These emotions are natural and valid. However, the problem arises when we allow these emotions to dictate how we behave. The moment we react impulsively, we lose control of the situation, and we fall into the trap of negativity that the toxic person has created. Non-reactivity, on the other hand, is a practice of empowerment. When we cultivate the ability to detach from the emotional triggers that toxic people bring, we regain our autonomy. We are no longer puppets of our emotions or the words of others. Instead, we stand in our own center, grounded in the awareness that we do not need to react in order to feel validated or protected. By choosing not to react, we deny toxic individuals the satisfaction of drawing us into their drama. We stop playing their game, and in doing so, we take away their power. But how do we practice non-reactivity in the face of toxicity? The first step is to recognize that we are not our emotions. Emotions come and go. They are like clouds passing through the sky. We may feel anger, frustration, or sadness when confronted with toxic behavior, but these feelings do not define us. To identify ourselves with these emotions is to give them control over our actions. Instead, we must practice observing them without judgment, allowing ourselves to feel without becoming attached to the feeling. In this way, we begin to create a healthy distance between our emotional experience and our actions. Once we can observe our emotions without being swept away by them, we can then choose how to respond. Responding with awareness is a key aspect of non-reactivity. It is a deliberate choice to act from a place of clarity and calm, rather than from impulse. This doesn't mean that we ignore our emotions or suppress them. Rather, it means we acknowledge our feelings without being governed by them. In the case of toxic people, this means recognizing their behavior for what it is, but not allowing it to dictate how we behave. We remain centered, calm, and detached from the drama. Detachment, however, is not about disengagement or avoidance. It's not about cutting people off or running away from difficult situations. Detachment, in this sense, means maintaining emotional and mental clarity in the face of negativity. It means that while we may be aware of the toxicity around us, we do not allow it to infect our thoughts, feelings, or actions. We remain anchored in our own sense of self, recognizing that the behavior of others does not define our worth or our inner peace. One of the most powerful aspects of non-reactivity is that it allows us to protect our energy. Toxic people can drain us, either through their words or their actions, leaving us feeling exhausted, depleted, and emotionally spent. By practicing non-reactivity, we create a barrier between ourselves and their negativity. Instead of allowing their words or actions to penetrate our emotional state, we create a shield of awareness that protects our energy. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent. Rather, we learn to recognize the energy around us and choose not to engage with it. Non-reactivity also allows us to avoid the cycle of escalation that often occurs when we confront toxic people. Toxic individuals often thrive on drama, and when we respond with anger or frustration, we feed into that drama. The situation escalates and we find ourselves locked in a back and forth of accusations, blame, and hostility. But when we choose non-reactivity, we deny them the energy they seek. We refuse to be dragged into their conflict. And in doing so, we short-circuit the cycle of toxicity. The more we practice this, the less power toxic people have over us. Ultimately, non-reactivity is about reclaiming our sovereignty. It is about recognizing that we have the power to choose how we respond to the world around us, including the toxic people we encounter. By choosing to respond with awareness, detachment, and calm, we are able to protect our peace and remain centered, no matter what negativity arises. The less we react, the more we free ourselves from the grip of others' toxicity, and in this freedom we create space for our own growth, healing, and well-being. When dealing with toxic people, one of the most important realizations we can have is the understanding of energy dynamics. Every interaction we have, whether positive or negative, carries an energetic exchange. We are constantly engaging in an invisible flow of energy, and much of the time this energy is influenced by the people we interact with. Toxic individuals in particular can drain our energy, siphoning off our emotional, mental, and even physical reserves without us even realizing it. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it allows us to recognize the impact others have on us and make conscious choices about how we invest our energy. Energy in this context is not a mystical concept but a practical reality. Each of us carries a certain level of energy. our emotional state, our mental focus, our physical vitality, and every interaction we engage in either amplifies or diminishes that energy. Positive interactions tend to uplift and energize us, while negative ones can deplete us, leaving us feeling drained, exhausted, or even physically unwell. Toxic people in particular seem to thrive on draining the energy of those around them, often without regard for how their actions affect others. The more we allow ourselves to become entangled in their negativity, the more we lose our own sense of energy, peace, and well-being. The challenge then is not only recognizing when someone is draining our energy, but also learning how to protect it. If we are constantly engaging with toxic individuals, whether they are family members, co-workers, or friends, we will eventually find ourselves worn out and emotionally spent. Our thoughts and emotions become consumed with trying to manage their behavior, to avoid conflict, or to fix what cannot be fixed. The result is a depletion of our own resources as we expend our energy trying to control something that is beyond our control. In essence, we become the reservoir for their toxicity, and they become the drain. This is where understanding the dynamic of energy becomes so important. Once we realize that our energy is our most precious resource, we can begin to take responsibility for how it is directed and protected. We must ask ourselves, what are we investing our energy in? Are we directing our focus toward our own growth, healing, and well-being, or are we continually giving it away to people who have no interest in our welfare? Toxic people rarely care about the toll they take on others. Their behavior often comes from their own pain, insecurity, or dysfunction, and they may not even be aware of the damage they cause. It is therefore up to us to take responsibility for our own energy and decide where we invest it. One of the most powerful ways to protect our energy from toxic people is by setting boundaries. Boundaries are not just about protecting our physical space, they are also about protecting our emotional and mental space. Setting clear and firm boundaries with toxic individuals is a form of self-respect. It communicates to them that we will no longer allow their negativity to invade our lives and diminish our well-being. This may involve limiting contact, being clear about what behaviors are unacceptable, or simply choosing not to engage in conversations that are draining or harmful. The key is to recognize that we are not obligated to give our energy to people who are not nourishing or supportive of us. In addition to setting boundaries, we must also learn to become more discerning about how we spend our energy. Not every person or situation is worthy of our emotional investment. Many times we feel compelled to engage with toxic individuals out of a sense of duty, guilt, or obligation. We may feel that it is our responsibility to fix them or to protect them from their own actions. However, this is a misguided belief that ultimately leads to our own depletion. We cannot pour from an empty cup. If we continue to give our energy to others without replenishing our own reserves, we will eventually burn out. It is crucial then to recognize that our energy must be protected, cultivated, and replenished. This recognition allows us to shift our focus back to ourselves. When we are no longer consumed by the toxic behavior of others, we free up space to focus on our own growth and development. Instead of trying to change others or fix their problems, we turn our attention inward, cultivating our own sense of peace, strength, and clarity. We begin to recognize that we are not responsible for the actions of others. We are only responsible for how we choose to respond. In this way, we can direct our energy toward positive pursuits, whether that is self-care, personal growth, creative expression, or spiritual practice, rather than wasting it on trying to control or fix situations beyond our control. In terms of energy dynamics, it is also important to remember that we are not helpless in the face of toxic people. While we cannot always change their behavior, we do have the power to change our own relationship to them. We can choose how much energy we are willing to invest in any given interaction. We can decide when enough is enough, and we can walk away from situations that are no longer serving us. The more we practice this, the stronger we become in our ability to preserve our energy and protect our inner peace. Another key aspect of understanding energy dynamics is recognizing that the more we engage with toxic people, the more we reinforce the energetic cycle of negativity. Toxic individuals often thrive on drama, conflict, and emotional intensity. When we engage with them, we inadvertently feed into that cycle, contributing to the ongoing drain on our energy. The less we engage, the less power they have over us. This means that by choosing not to react, by not getting caught in the cycle of negativity, we can disengage from their drama and reclaim our energy. We break the cycle by choosing not to participate. Ultimately, learning to manage the energy dynamics of our relationships is a crucial part of self-care and personal growth. It is not about avoiding toxic people altogether, but about recognizing the impact they have on us and taking conscious steps to protect ourselves. By setting boundaries, being discerning with our energy, and disengaging from negative cycles, we create space for positivity, growth, and healing. Our energy is our most precious resource, and it is up to us to protect it. By doing so, we not only protect our peace, but also cultivate the strength, clarity, and resilience needed to thrive in a world that is filled with both light and darkness. Self-love and boundaries are two concepts that are deeply intertwined when it comes to dealing with toxic people. At their core, both self-love and boundaries are about recognizing our inherent worth and protecting our emotional and mental space. They are acts of self-respect and self-care that allow us to preserve our peace and well-being, particularly in the presence of individuals who may drain us or diminish our sense of self-worth. Self-love is often misunderstood in the context of dealing with toxic people. It is not about self-indulgence or selfishness. Rather, it is about acknowledging our value and honoring our needs. In the face of toxic behavior, it is all too easy to forget our own worth and to start questioning ourselves. Toxic individuals often employ manipulation, guilt-tripping, or emotional coercion to make others feel small or unworthy. When we are exposed to this kind of behavior, it can erode our self-esteem and make us question our worthiness. But practicing self-love means not allowing these negative influences to define us. It means recognizing that we are valuable simply by virtue of our existence, and that no one, especially a toxic person, has the right to diminish that value. Self-love is also about prioritizing our own well-being over the demands of others. Toxic people can be particularly skilled at extracting energy from those around them. Whether emotionally, mentally, or even physically, they may demand more than we are capable of giving, or they may try to guilt us into sacrificing our own needs to meet theirs. In these situations, practicing self-love means setting boundaries and saying no when necessary. It is not an act of cruelty or indifference. Rather, it is an act of honoring ourselves. By setting clear and firm boundaries, we communicate to toxic individuals that our needs and well-being matter, and that we will not tolerate behavior that undermines our peace. Setting boundaries is perhaps one of the most powerful tools we have for protecting ourselves from toxic people. Boundaries are not about shutting others out or creating walls around ourselves. They are about creating a healthy space between us and others, one that protects our emotional and mental health. When we set boundaries, we are saying, "This is where I begin and where you end." It is a way of delineating what is acceptable behavior and what is not. Boundaries allow us to communicate clearly and assertively without being passive or aggressive. They help us preserve our sense of self and maintain our integrity, even in the face of difficult or toxic interactions. Setting boundaries can be challenging, especially with toxic people. These individuals often resist boundaries, viewing them as a threat to their control or influence. They may react with anger, guilt, or manipulation in an attempt to push past the limits we set. It can be uncomfortable to hold firm in these moments, but it is essential to remember that boundaries are not about punishing the other person. They are about protecting ourselves. When we fail to set boundaries, we are essentially allowing toxic individuals to dictate the terms of our experience, eroding our peace and self-respect. But when we set boundaries, we take back control of our emotional and mental state. We reclaim our power. There are different types of boundaries, and it is important to recognize that some may be more appropriate than others, depending on the nature of the relationship. For example, in a close family relationship or a work environment, we may need to set clear emotional boundaries to protect ourselves from being drained or manipulated. In more casual or distant relationships, we may choose to limit contact or disengage altogether to avoid unnecessary stress or harm. Regardless of the type of boundary we set, the key is to communicate our limits clearly and consistently. Boundaries are not effective if they are vague or inconsistent. If we waver in our commitment to them, we send mixed messages to the toxic person, which may encourage them to push past our limits. Setting boundaries also involves being aware of our own feelings and needs. Often we allow toxic people to overstep our boundaries because we are unsure of what we truly need or desire. We may feel guilty for asserting our needs, or we may fear that we will upset the other person. But self-love means honoring our needs and recognizing that we deserve respect and care. It is important to take time to reflect on what we need in a relationship and to communicate those needs openly and respectfully. When we fail to express our boundaries, we inadvertently invite the toxic behavior to continue. But when we set clear and healthy boundaries, we empower ourselves and reinforce our sense of self-worth. In some cases, setting boundaries may require a shift in our thinking. We may need to reframe how we view our relationship with the toxic person. If we are constantly giving to someone who is draining us, we may need to consider whether the relationship is truly serving us. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to walk away from a toxic relationship altogether. This is not a sign of weakness or failure. It is a sign of strength and self-respect. By walking away, we are choosing to prioritize our own well-being over the toxic dynamic, and in doing so, we are taking a powerful stand for ourselves. Self-love and boundaries are not just about what we do in the presence of toxic people, but about how we approach ourselves in every aspect of life. They are about recognizing our worth, honoring our needs, and maintaining a strong sense of self regardless of external circumstances. When we love ourselves, we are less likely to tolerate behavior that undermines our peace. We are also more likely to attract relationships that are nurturing, supportive, and empowering. By setting boundaries, we create the space necessary for these positive relationships to flourish. When we honor our own needs and values, we open the door to healthier, more fulfilling connections with others. Ultimately, self-love and boundaries are acts of empowerment. They allow us to navigate the challenges of life, including toxic people, with clarity, strength, and resilience. By practicing self-love, we are affirming our inherent worth and our right to live in peace. By setting boundaries, we are protecting our energy and creating the space for our growth and healing. These two practices go hand in hand, forming the foundation of a life that is centered in self-respect, self-care, and self-awareness. When we honor ourselves in this way, we cultivate a sense of peace and security that no one can take away. One of the most profound shifts in our relationship with toxic people is the realization that we are not here to fix them, nor should we feel responsible for changing their behavior. This shift in perspective can be a game changer because it allows us to release the burden of trying to control others, something that ultimately drains our energy and undermines our sense of self. It is easy to fall into the trap of believing that we are the ones who need to heal or transform toxic individuals, especially if we care deeply about them. However, when we make it our responsibility to change someone else, we lose sight of our own personal growth and well-being. The truth is, The only person we can truly change is ourselves. And when we accept that, we free ourselves from the exhausting cycle of trying to fix others. This understanding doesn't mean that we don't care about toxic individuals or that we should abandon them entirely. It simply means that we acknowledge the boundaries of our influence and accept that each person is on their own journey. If someone is toxic, it is often because they are struggling with their own pain, unresolved issues, or personal limitations. They may not have the awareness or the tools to make healthier choices, and no amount of our effort can force them to change. We must accept that it is not our responsibility to heal others, even though we may wish we could. When we try to fix someone who is unwilling or unable to change, we not only exhaust ourselves, but also place ourselves in a position where we feel perpetually frustrated and helpless. The real liberation comes from recognizing that we can step back, give them the space to work through their issues in their own time, and focus on our own growth. When we let go of the need to fix toxic people, we open the door to a healthier and more empowered relationship with them. Instead of seeing them as projects to be saved or fixed, we can approach them with compassion and understanding, but also with the awareness that we are not responsible for their actions or outcomes. Compassion is not the same as enmeshment, where we lose ourselves in another person's drama. Compassion is the ability to see another person's suffering without taking it on as our own. It is recognizing that their toxic behavior comes from a place of pain or fear, but that we are not obligated to carry that pain with them. This shift allows us to maintain our peace while still holding space for their struggles. By stepping back from the desire to fix someone, we create emotional space for ourselves. We are no longer consumed with trying to change their behavior or solve their problems. This emotional detachment is not about being cold or indifferent. It is about recognizing that our primary responsibility is to ourselves. When we focus on our own growth and well-being, we are better equipped to handle difficult situations and to engage with toxic people in a way that protects our energy. We no longer feel overwhelmed or drained by their actions because we no longer see ourselves as their saviors. We become observers of their behavior rather than participants in their emotional drama. Furthermore, this shift in perspective helps us develop healthier boundaries with toxic individuals. When we stop trying to fix them, we can start setting clearer and firmer boundaries. We no longer feel the need to excuse or tolerate their behavior, believing that we can change them if we just try hard enough. Instead, we recognize that their behavior is a reflection of their own issues, and we are not required to accept it if it harms us. We can create boundaries that protect our emotional and mental health without guilt or hesitation. Boundaries become a way of preserving our peace and reclaiming our power. In letting go of the need to fix toxic people, we also let go of the unrealistic expectations we place on them. It is common to hope that one day they will change or that they will suddenly see the error of their ways. But this hope can be a source of endless frustration because it keeps us tied to the idea that their behavior must shift for us to be happy or at peace. The truth is, we cannot control how someone else behaves, no matter how much we care about them. When we release the expectation that toxic people will change, we free ourselves from the cycle of disappointment and resentment. We stop waiting for them to become what we want them to be, and begin accepting them as they are, with all their flaws and limitations. Acceptance does not mean approval or agreement with their behavior. It simply means recognizing the reality of the situation without allowing it to define our emotional state. This acceptance does not mean we continue to tolerate toxic behavior. It means that we stop trying to force change and instead focus on what we can control, our own responses and actions. We stop pouring energy into trying to fix the unfixable, and we start directing our energy toward building a life that is aligned with our values and well-being. We can still be compassionate, still care for them, but we do so without taking on the responsibility of fixing them. This is a profound shift that allows us to engage with toxic people in a way that preserves our own sense of self. Ultimately, the realization that we are not here to fix toxic people is a form of self-liberation. It is an act of self-care to let go of the burden of changing someone else and to focus instead on our own growth. This does not mean that we abandon those who need help, or that we close ourselves off from others. Rather, it means that we acknowledge that we cannot force someone to change if they are not ready to do so. We cannot carry their pain for them, but we can offer support in ways that are healthy for us. We can set boundaries, practice self-care, and focus on our own healing, knowing that our energy is best spent on our own growth and not on trying to change someone else. In letting go of the need to fix toxic people, we create space for healthier, more balanced relationships that are based on mutual respect, understanding, and shared growth. We free ourselves from the emotional burden of trying to save others, and in doing so, empower ourselves to create a life that is more fulfilling, peaceful, and authentic. By focusing on what we can control, our own behavior, our own healing, and our own well-being, we step into our power and reclaim the energy that toxic people once consumed. This shift is transformative, as it allows us to engage with life in a way that is rooted in self-love, self-respect, and inner strength.